Колеги, вітання. Ми продовжуємо робочий день і зараз
Good afternoon, colleagues. We continue now. We are going to speak about the reform of army provision on the background of Lithuania. Our speaker is Konstantin Lesnik, head of the material supply department of the ministry, and Mr. Shulga from Lithuania, please. Good afternoon. I'm Konstantin Lesnik, head of the working group of the Ministry of Defense for the reform of material supply. Our work group was established this January. We have been working for 3 months, and our key task is to change the material supply of the army according to NATO standards. It's quite a challenging work because it is related to profound changes to the system, the old Soviet-based system. And we try to reform it. We try not to invent the bicycle, and we try to learn from the experience of NATO countries, particularly those countries that had the Soviet past with them and who had initially inherited the same Soviet system that we have been having now. For that purpose, we invited professionals from Georgia. We had many meetings at all imaginable levels. We also invite our friends from Lithuania, the ex-USSR country that strongly supports Ukraine now, and we try to learn and borrow from their experience because they passed their path 10 years ago, and this is the way that we are going through now. We have a lot of work to do. We've done already many things, and we try to basically change the attitude towards the uniform, the material supply of our servicemen. We've introduced the military set that we hope will be introduced across the army and other military units in Ukraine to have it as a uniform material supply set established according to specific standards. We also developed the system of acceptance and quality control, trying to fight the existing Soviet-based system. I've mentioned it several times already that one of the key problems at the moment is that all the functions of army administration related to procurement, quality control, acceptance are overseen by different departments without any mention of specific standards or specific requirements to the quality of material supply of other materials. And I have been unsuccessful in ascertaining who's the culprit, who's the key responsible for all that the very much distributed system. And at the moment, we are designing relevant regulations to make a uniform approach, and the new system will have one boss, and it will provide answers to 2 questions. Who is the culprit of previous drawbacks? And secondly, who will be responsible for this coordinated approach that we implemented now? And we closely collaborate on that with our Lithuanian friends. We work round the clock, almost round the clock, attempting to borrow from their experience as soon as possible, because we are in the war conflict and we have no time to do it for many years. Either we win or they win over us. Georgia has a bit different experience. They had some time for them to do this reform. We don't have this time for us at the moment. Because of that, we work with our Lithuanian colleague. And I'd like to present now my brother in blood, Maras Shulga, the ex-military serviceman of the military forces of Lithuania. He strongly participated and was involved in the reform of the system that time. Further on, we'll see another person, a high-ranking military official from the Lithuanian military forces. He will come to Ukraine next week, and we hope to have a briefing with him. He is the one who currently manages the existing material supply system in the Lithuanian army. Marian's experience is interesting because he was president at the time when the old Soviet system in Lithuania was rebuilt to match the NATO standards. And he's surely one of the leading specialists of that, and he is one of the leading specialists in one of the leading international companies supplying uniforms and other supplies to army. His experience is in great demand today, as well as mine actually, because I am professional in military business, and with ongoing demand on people like us, I think that I will do my best to deliver my experience to the Ukrainian army. Now the floor is to Marian. Let me briefly introduce myself. Marius Shulga. I spent 6 years in the Lithuanian army in military units. As the country is small, in these conditions we were compelled to do everything ourselves, from the design of the uniform to the manufacturing, supply, etc. And I was involved heavily in the design of the uniforms and all necessary supplies, and it is about my whole life. It is my work, my hobby, etc. Having left the army after our country joined the NATO, I started working for a number of international companies. Now I'm employed with a big US company that is the market leader in military uniforms, in uniforms done for law enforcement agencies. We also supply some military equipment to some 8 countries worldwide. A friend of mine, Konstantin Lesnik, has invited me here to share my experience, my views in respect of the design of uniforms for the Army of Ukraine. And that was actually the way I joined their groups of developers and designers, and I tried to help them with my expert knowledge. If we look back for my Lithuanian experience, I can tell what are the points of Lithuanian experience that may be relevant for Ukraine. First of all, the common Soviet heritage. When we finally received and gained independence in the beginning of 90s, we started our reforms according to Western models. What Lithuania has now that Ukraine hasn't got, we had time, because it really took more than 10 years, and we really had to fight a host of problems very similar to those that Ukraine faces now, starting from corruption to interests of groups of influence to problems with manufacturers, and where we finally managed to get clear with the problems, and our uniforms, our armaments are really identical and in nothing different from what they use in other NATO countries. Say the assault rifles that we use are exactly those used in Spain, in Germany, elsewhere, and we are no different from other NATO countries. The very idea of this program launched in Ukrainian military forces is to bring the standards of equipment and uniform to certain international standards, so that people in the field, military servicemen in the field, would be able to use all the advantages of modern processes, modern technologies, modern materials. The Soviet model of army provision, this is no secret, it was something that was hard to struggle with. We were not lucky, as many experts would say, in the respect that the USSR took all the uniforms, the armaments from the country, so we had nothing to start with. Equipment and materials and armaments stayed in Ukraine, though. So in due time, Lithuania had to start developing everything from scratch itself. And we spent 10 years for the process, because we had to come up with the idea of what are our production capacities, what our producers are capable of, and we started with what we could do rather than what our military servicemen needed. And thanks to our partners in the NATO, we were able to identify what was needed by the military servicemen, and that provided some cardinal changes. This is the way that I think Ukraine has to go. You need to start with what type of, say, shoes or assault rifles the local industry is able to produce, and to start from that. As soon as we are clear with what we can produce locally, then we are better able to specify our requirements to this production. And then we'll need to build specific process which will rule out any corruption and other negatives in it. When we've designed this process, we can say we are very confident that we will never procure things that are not really necessary for the front, for the army. And this will also provide financial savings, because optimized procurement schemes always provide possibilities of saving. And if even there is an international scheme in place, international procurement schemes with international suppliers and bidders applied to the country, it is not always good for the country on one hand, but on the other hand, it provides some competition incentives when local producers are compelled to improve their processes and production capacities to match this competition. But again, for such procurement schemes, we need to finalize certain stock taking or standardization of our items for everyone, even from bidders from abroad, to be clear as to what products are necessary and what standards should be complied with. Speaking of the process, of the new updated process, we are currently updating the process in the armed forces of Ukraine in accordance with the NATO standards, and the group of Konstantin is really working on all sorts of items, procurement items from socks upwards. In my country, in Lithuania, we provided detailed designs and descriptions of standards for our procurement procedures, and we always were of opinion that it was not relevant whether we can produce it ourselves or we need to buy it from elsewhere, because we definitely needed those end products here in our country. Because of that, Konstantin Group provides advice to local producers and also communicates requirements and standards designed in Ukraine to potential international bidders. I've never seen anything like this in any other country worldwide, and it really merits huge. It really merits some good words and huge acclaim for their expert approach, because really the guys were able to find friends in other countries to muster this collective support, this collective expertise for the benefit of the Ukrainian army supply system. I personally know Konstantin for more than 10 years. We worked together on many projects, and I can tell you that Konstantin Lesnik is one of the few top-notch specialists operating on these markets. The army supply market is really a very niche market. There are little such specialists and professionals worldwide, because you will find no higher education courses on military supply. because you may not train anyone in that. A person needs to understand himself from scratch what it is all about, what it is about having proper materials used to build or design proper uniforms or supplies for the army. For these people normally start from investing in themselves because they frequent international exhibitions and fairs, investing their own efforts, time, and money to collect and boost their experience in the area. And Konstantin was invited many times to the seminars organized by our American company, and he was really at the relevant level of expertise to freely communicate with fellow colleagues and experts from the United States, the Netherlands, and other countries. And I can tell you that currently this expert group with the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine is a rare and successful combination of core people chaired by a really unique person, unique for Ukraine because of his profound experience in the area and his deep commitment to keep with the task. And in my closing remarks, I'd like to tell you also that Konstantin Lesnik's group is not only about the design of uniforms, but they're also very open in communication, in public communication. This is really some unique thing when through their process of design of military uniform and military supply items, they openly share their concepts and ideas on the internet, in social media, trying to keep everyone informed. And I can tell you that you have a unique chance to make a huge leap ahead owing to this unique approach, and you can have very tangible results. Having checked comments on social networks regarding the group's operations, I kindly ask you and call upon you to quit your pessimism, to stop posting negative things on the internet, but rather to think how and in what way can you contribute to this group's task. Thank you, Maris. Thank you, Konstantin. There's a question from the UCMC. How much time, in your opinion, will be required to fully reform the system of material supply of the Ukrainian army? And what are your KPIs? The success of the reform is when now all our military servicemen will have quality uniforms and will be supplied with everything necessary. This is not the final end in itself, because the process of design may not be stopped just like that. It is an ongoing process. Because even if we provide everyone according to the most current standards, we will nevertheless have to build a living system, a self-sustainable system capable of keeping it going for years and years to come. There are some contacts on material supply between the NATO and the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, but I see little performance and little progress in that. And even the information they get from the scientific research institutes of NATO countries is hard really to be implemented here in Ukraine, because it is really finally about establishing a system of research and development, a system of units to design, supply, test, roll out, and market this produce. And there should be also quality control facility in place. There will be some units unified by the common goal to oversee every piece, every process from from the start of design of some field boots to the ultimate distribution. And this work should also necessarily include logistical efforts based on individual approach to soldiers' needs. There should be individual ideas for every military serviceman with his size, requirements, etc., to make it really uniformly applicable. At the moment, there are 4 or 5 internal regulations of the Ministry of Defense that regulate these supplies matters, and that's not efficient, it's very complex, and instead we want to introduce a transparent system according to the list of required items, so that everyone would be able to check it, from the Minister of Defense to the servicemen or their relatives. And this should be an online system so that everyone could see when the person got his field boots for the last time, or what other supplies he has or has not received on the due date. So the science that I like the most is analytical strategy. So I think that with proper design of that system, it will be a self-sustaining system that will exist. I think that on the first stage we need to fill in all the gaps to make our uniform, etc., supply at least closer to the NATO standards. Marius was modest enough to say that their supply levels are at par with NATO standards. Essentially, the Lithuanian guys are equipped much better than the US Army is. They are very quick on their toes in terms of promptly introducing new technologies. We still have long way to go to that level, because we have no internal regulations, we have no standards or specifications. You can see, say, rucksacks that are necessary for the army, but you can find a wide and wild range of these rucksacks offered for military use, though you may see those initially designed for fishers or for hunters, but these rucksacks will seldom serve the military purpose in terms of the specific needs that military servicemen have. Because of that, we need to come up with specific regulations and specifications and quality requirements. And again, in the end, we will come up with a self-sustaining life system that will deliver and will evolve with time almost independently. My task is to build a system, to educate personnel to work within that system and with it, so that people will be able to work and improve the system already without my help. What's your time estimate for that? You see, lot depends here from the political will. I do see political will at the level of the president, the prime minister. At the moment, we see and we feel all the support to our ideas. But as we go further down, you can imagine those hidden flows that we will be thwarting effectively. It will depend. Again, at the moment, job descriptions and manning lists are being designed for this center. We are not waiting for this body or unit to be finally officially established, and my group continues working over those products that will be supplied to the army as soon as this unit is up and going. You know that previous types of fabrics that were used for military uniforms were made from polyester and other such flammable materials that hardly served their purpose, and I can assure you that the next procurements of military uniforms will be done with fabrics that comply with highest standards in that. You saw some early examples of what we can produce. Say the military had that the leaders of the state demonstrated recently. Some might like it, some may not, but at least they're functional and they serve their purpose and they're attainable. So we come two ways: by establishing the center, trying to fill it with top-notch young professionals, trying to weed out people, old-timers actually, from the old system. We are really looking for young specialists who will, even by trials and errors, but will go in the right direction. And the second line of activity is about establishing this possibility to procure full sets of uniforms for all weathers, for all seasons, like they have it elsewhere in the United States and elsewhere, to be used in military, in fight conditions, and for training purposes. We've established a subgroup comprising of designers, journalists, manufacturers, to design 3 concepts of designation marks for the military. Say they want to be used at parades and other solemn official ceremonies, camouflage variant, another standard issue uniform set. For military conditions, the comfort is one of key requirements. Comfort and safety are of paramount importance, and this should also be taken into consideration. And we're going to produce some early designs. In early May, we will show it first to the President, to the Prime Minister, then we will continue with public hearings and public debates of our design concepts, and hope that some of the design concepts will be accepted or at least used as a basis, in order to make sure that by this autumn our army will be able to get new, updated and serviceable uniforms, to keep people safe and alive as much as it is possible. And our design unit is really not the biggest one in our would-be center, because there is also a unit that will deal with rationing and diet of military servicemen and many other related units. And there is also a huge logistical effort to be done, because it is about optimized costs and optimized expenditures. I think that by this autumn we will have the backbone of the system already up and going. Thank you. Any further questions? Any comments? If no, what will be the mechanism of oversight and monitoring of a proper material provision of the army? At the moment, we only have Soviet time mechanisms of the so-called transfer and acceptance, because that time army was a separate institution that we inherited, that has never changed in 23 years. Let's be frank, that until now the army led its own parallel life, very much based on Soviet traditions and Soviet supply norms and standards. You may laugh and grin, but according to those old norms, no vests are necessary by military servicemen. So it was quite an isolated underworld, and I had a word with our lawyers yesterday to rewrite the supply agreement, and I really laughed heartily, because all the acceptance measures were reference to the quality monitoring system established by the then USSR Cabinet of Ministers from 1965 and 1966. You can imagine those acceptance requirements established half a century ago that they have still to use until now. With new acceptance conditions, we will have a special department in the Ministry of Defense that will really see manufacturers monitoring and overseeing production process in reality. You know that in Soviet time we had some limited number of companies, enterprises or plants that would produce some military uniform, dedicated plants. And the Soviet system was to send some military controllers to those enterprises to see if the produce is up to standards. I recently tried to convince the people that we are now living in capitalist times. It is about new companies being set up or existing companies being established and upgraded, and it may not be physically possible to have adequate numbers of some ministerial officers going to all these enterprises and plants to control and oversee the process. Say, in the last year, there were some fabric specifications that local producers managed to replace with some cheaper and poor performing Chinese based variants. That is, the existing monitoring system, quality monitoring system, did not work. So there are some warehouses, centralized army warehouses, where everything goes. We can imagine some officers, some monitors sitting there. We can imagine some video surveillance equipment being stationed there to check that no corrupt actions have been taken or attempted. But anyway, it is not feasible. Anyway, it is not feasible to have one monitor in an attempt for one person to physically check, say, 10,000 military uniform sets. That's why I think that the option would be to have some people sitting at central wear stock houses with proper video and photo surveillance systems to avoid any accusations. And Marius can confirm that there are companies that work for the general commercial markets and for military markets. And there are people, dedicated people, who may check the produce going to military markets twice or thrice, because everyone knows that ministries of defense are very demanding customers who will not listen to any excuses or explanations as regards substandard nature of supplies. It is because the military have huge orders, tall orders, and every producer, every manufacturer worldwide will be more than happy to get a tall order of, say, 250,000 uniforms produced in a year. Our local producers still think that they're doing some huge benefit by consenting to do something for the army. So currently we see already people being set up for and at military warehouses, stock houses, to use new updated standards and regulations to check, selectively check some supplies. Surely it may not be a complete verification procedure going down to the type of fabric, type of buttons used or whatever, but some selective verification measures can be introduced already now when, say, a number of units, produced units, are being taken for in-depth expertise to see if they do really comply with established requirements under the threat of penalties, definitely. I think it will bring the situation with domestic manufacturing back to normal. There was a meeting last Tuesday with those manufacturers, and I told them that, yeah, you try to save on as much as it is possible, because you've been used to work like this for 23 years. You were used to supplying substandard goods to the army, knowing in advance that the army will have to take it. Now everything will change. Whatever order, whatever contract you exercise for the army, you will have to meet very specific requirements, commercially, administratively. If you do not deliver, you will have huge penalties. There will be big problems for you. There will be no absolutely tolerance, zero tolerance to substandard supplies to the army. When those manufacturers who are scrupulous one find themselves in such situation, they will think twice before attempting anything like that again. Okay, thank you. In absence of further questions and remarks, let me thank you, and we will have. Let us hope that we will have the end of ATO by this autumn, or at least you will be able to produce your desired system. Thank you.